Welcome, everyone. I'm Erica Meltzer, the Bureau Chief for Chalkbeat Colorado. If you're not already familiar with Chalkbeat, we're a nonprofit news organization dedicated to education issues with a focus on equity. You can find us at co.chalkbeat.org, as well as on Facebook and Twitter. I'm joined by Jason Gonzalez, who covers higher education and the legislature for Chalkbeat. This legislative preview is one of our most popular and longest running events, and we're very grateful to our event partner, the University of Denver Morgridge College of Education, and our event sponsor, the Colorado Education Association, for making this event possible. We're also so grateful to our panelists and to our audience members for making time for this conversation today. We're gathered in very different circumstances than we were a year ago. A pandemic has transformed education for Colorado students, often not for the better. Many students have had limited access to in-person instruction. The state faces ongoing fiscal challenges. And our nation is grappling with last week's events in Washington, when a mob stormed the seat of government with the intent to overturn a lawful election. Lawmakers in Colorado have always prided themselves on being more collaborative and less partisan than their counterparts in Congress. The events on the national stage remind us that this does not happen by accident, but by our constant commitment to our democratic norms and institutions, to putting the public good above party and self, and by engaging in good faith debate, even when we disagree profoundly. I'm grateful to be joined today by legislators and community members who share that commitment. Before we get started with our conversation, Caroline Bauman is going to take us through some of our Zoom logistics and protocols for this conversation.
Hi, everyone. We're so glad that you are joining us today. As Erica mentioned, we are gathering here over Zoom. We would normally be all together. And so I want to just take a moment to get a feel for who's in the room, take a few seconds to fill out this poll, and I'll share the results. I want to mention that the chat box is turned off on Zoom. However, our Q&A box is open, and we encourage you to use that to submit questions. We'll have a time at the end for audience questions, and we're excited about that. This event is being recorded, and it will be shared afterward for anyone who's not able to attend. I do want to share the results with you all so you can get a feel who your fellow participants are. We have representatives of all categories here, which is exciting to me. Lots of educators and professors, students, university officials, school leaders, lobbyists, policymakers, and journalists. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to hand it over to our event partner, Dean Karen Riley, who's the Dean of the Morgridge College of Education at DU, who's going to share a few words with us. And Dean Riley, I'm just going to ask you to unmute.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and welcome to Chalkbeat Colorado's legislative preview. I am Karen Riley, the Dean of the Morgridge College of Education here at the University of Denver. If you would please put up the land acknowledgement slide. The Morgridge College of Education and the University of Denver begins all public events with a formal acknowledgement of the lands on which we convene. I would like to start by acknowledging that the University of Denver resides on land held in stewardship by the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes. Today, Denver is home to many different citizens of indigenous nations, and we recognize their enduring presence on this land by paying respects to their elders, both past and present. It is because of the sacrifices and hardships of the traditional indigenous inhabitants of this land that we're able to be here to learn, to collaborate, and to share knowledge. I'm going to move on now. So we come together. I'd like to echo some of the comments that were already made. We come together as a community in the midst of dual pandemics and following a disturbing and unacceptable event at our nation's capital. These events have raised many questions and concerns about the state of our democracy and our role as educators, advocates, researchers, parents, business owners, and neighbors. We at the Morgridge College of Education categorically disavow violence against individuals, groups, and institutions, regardless of political ideology or persuasion, and unequivocally condemn such violence and disrespect. On several previous occasions, I have praised Chalkbeat and our local legislators for coming together to provide all of us with an opportunity to learn, to engage, and to deepen our understanding of the democratic process and the implications for education, mental health, and shared information. At a time in our nation's history in which division and violence have torn us apart, events like today reinstate hope and promise that the democratic process can work and that our elected officials and leaders are indeed committed to serving the community. Education by its nature is political. It's based on policies that are developed and informed by those whom we elect. During a time in our country in which we find few examples of individuals from across the aisle coming together and centering the needs of constituents, I am proud to be in a state where we can come together and have informed and deep dialogues, even if we don't agree. I have worked with many on this panel to improve the systems and improve the policies for the benefit of children and families across our state. And personally, and on behalf of the Morgridge College of Education, I want to thank you for your service. And I look forward to this deep and thoughtful discussion. Now I'm going to turn it over to our moderators, Erica and Jason from Chalkbeat, Colorado.
Thank you for that, Dean Riley. I'd like to introduce our panelists. We're joined today by State Senator Rachel Zenzinger, an Arvada Democrat and Chair of the Senate Education Committee. State Senator Paul Lundeen, a Republican from Monument. State Senator Janet Buckner, a Democrat from Aurora. State Representative Colin Larson, a Littleton Republican, and State Senator Representative Yadira Caraveo, a Democrat from Thornton. Got a little mixed up there, so I'm sorry. Before we start, and as a note, I know Senator Lundeen might have to leave early because of other commitments, so thank you for attending in advance. To keep us grounded in why we are all here and care about this work, I'd like to start by asking Representative Caraveo to share her perspective as a pediatrician. What are you seeing in your practice, and how are children doing?
Well, good afternoon now to everyone, and thank you so much for this invitation to join you. I will be joining the Education Committee in the House, and so I'm a newbie to this, going to be a newbie to this committee, and excited to join Representative Larson on the committee. But have been working around education issues with kids every single day in clinic as a pediatrician for over a decade now, and so I know that we all, having experience in working with children, have concerns about how children are doing right now. Medically, they're doing pretty well with COVID because they are not quite as impacted as older Coloradans, but they're being impacted in so many other ways. And the biggest of those that I'm seeing in clinic every day and having constant conversations about is virtual schooling and how they're handling that. We have seen a huge spike in depression and anxiety in kids in clinic since March, in part, I think, because of the social isolation and also dealing with just the reality of COVID and how much their lives have changed. So, to put it in perspective, we are lucky enough to have a social worker who works in our clinic. And towards the start of the pandemic, she was telling us that usually we sent her about 10 new patient referrals a week for things ranging from depression, anxiety, ADHD, all sorts of mental health issues. And by the end of March, we were sending her 10 referrals a day. And so it really has skyrocketed in terms of the number of kids that are dealing with mental health issues. And because of that, ending up in therapy and many times on medication because of those issues. I'm also seeing kids who have always been really great students and have never had issues in terms of need for special services in school, who suddenly are having a lot of issues keeping up with work, engaging with work, and really just feeling connected to their to the educational process, including, honestly, my cousin, who has always been a straight A student and has suddenly started to have real academic issues. So we're doing a lot of therapy around issues like that as well. And then in particular with the kids who we see who have ADHD, who we treat on a regular basis in clinic, really trying to look for more accommodations because they in particular are having a lot of issues connecting through a virtual environment, even though at the very
very least, they get to kind of stand up and do a lot of more of those fidgeting exercises than they usually get to do in school without disrupting other kids. And then we're seeing just a lot of issues around the social isolation and the lack of activity, the lack of their ability to go out and connect with other students. A large amount of, we all as adults joke about the COVID-19, but it's not just adults who are gaining weight because of COVID. We're seeing that a lot in kids and a lot more time being spent indoors, and that in turn is, of course, affecting not just their physical health, but their mental health. So lots of things that kids are going through because of this pandemic, although medically they're doing well with the virus itself.
Thank you for that. I think that really makes clear the stakes of what we're dealing with this year. And I'm sure the folks in the audience who are parents, some of those things probably resonated with them as well. I'd like to, starting with Senator Zenzinger and building off of what Representative Caraveo just shared, what do you see as the most critical challenge facing students this year, and what should the legislature be doing to address it?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. I'm State Senator Rachel Zenzinger, and I represent Senate District 19, which is Arvada and Westminster in Jefferson County. And I am an educator and a current practitioner, and have been working within Jefferson County, the Jefferson County School District, as a substitute teacher right now while I'm in the legislature. And I think that Representative Caraveo covered a lot of the challenges. And I would just like to reference the question that was put into the Q&A here around what are those supports that we might be thinking around the social emotional issues, because that is an issue that I believe really is coming to the forefront as at least, the top three issues that I think that our students are going to be facing. But in addition to that, we have all sorts of type of learners out there, and I'm really concerned about access to good quality education, and that all students are receiving the supports that they need. So we have lots of different types of learners, and I think that one of those challenges in going forward this year is how do we continue in the midst of a pandemic, continue to support all of those different types of learners, whether they be special ed learners, whether they be gifted learners, whether they be English language learners, and so I think that those would be my top two.
Thank you. Senator Lundeen, what do you see as the most significant challenge, and what the legislature should do about it?
Hi, Erica, Jason, Dean Riley, and the University of Denver, Chalkbeat, and CEA. Appreciate so much, as always, the opportunity to engage in this, what I perceive to be always a very productive and interesting dialogue. It's going to be an honor to serve with the new chair of the Senate Education Committee, Rachel Zenzinger. Senator Zenzinger, I look forward to, we've worked on panels together. I look forward to renewing the best moments of our interactions and building on those significantly. Senator-elect Buckner, you are one of my favorite human beings on the planet, and I look forward so much to working with you. We find ourselves in a really interesting time right now, and I think it's incumbent upon us as legislators to demonstrate concern and respect for all the people whom we have made the effort to get elected to serve. And for this purposes of this particular conversation, it's respecting and being concerned for students is clearly an important focus. And we all know that this is the leverage point of society. It's tomorrow, it's the future. It's what we hope will be the best experience for an individual, because education can be a turning point in a child's life, and the best experience for who we become as a society. And as was mentioned in the introductory comments, right now, society is looking a little bit frayed, and not afraid, but frayed, worn, torn at the edges. And we need to do the efforts to bring things back together. And I think that this particular group, this particular panel, and I noticed that more than a third of the people listening were educators or participating are educators, has the specific skills to do what is so important. We need to listen to the people whom we deign to serve, and we need to learn from the experiences we've gone through. Now, there's no learning opportunity that provides greater clarity than a life-threatening event. And that's essentially what the coronavirus has been. It's been a life-threatening event in many people's lives, and it's shifted and changed so many things. So the core question incumbent upon us right now is, will we choose to go back to what business looked like before all of this happened, or will we learn from the incredible challenging experiences that we've been through? And I think Senator Chair Zenzinger, I'm going to get in the habit of saying that because I'm looking forward to saying that, Chair Zenzinger put her finger on it. There are many types of learners. They come into the circumstance of seeking what we all want them to get, because society cannot be sustained without an educated populace. They come to us in different ways, and we need to be far more attentive to serving those types of learners and meeting them where they are as we rethink in some ways, as we learn from this experience we've been through and hopefully shape better learning opportunities and therefore getting better learning outcomes for students on behalf of them as individuals and on behalf of ourselves as society. So huge conversations. The core question I will call on us over and over: can we learn from this incredible, difficult, and yet clarifying experience we have been through?
Thank you. Senator-elect Buckner, how are you thinking about these questions?
You would think after all this time, I'd know to unmute. It is such an honor to be on this panel today. I am one of those Chalkbeat followers because you all are always on top of everything that's going on. You keep us on our toes, and I think that's great. I am a new senator-elect for Senate District 28. I couldn't be prouder. I'm following in the footsteps of Senator Nancy Todd. She was my senator, and she has taught me so much, and I am honored to be the new senator. I will be senator, not senator-elect, on the 13th when I am sworn in. I live in Aurora, and Senate District 28 encompasses Aurora. I will be representing Aurora Public Schools and Cherry Creek Schools, but obviously I'm here for the whole state of Colorado. When I'm listening to everyone so far, when we all run for office, one of the constant themes I hear all the time is I'm going to work for those students so they can all reach their potential and get the best education possible, regardless of their zip code. We can't forget that. We have to be inclusive. We have to mean what we say about including all kids. So I believe everyone on the Education Committee in the Senate and the House and everyone on this call will do that, just that. We may not always see eye to eye, but we respect each other. We are all going to meet each other where we are in our thinking about education, come together, collaborate, and everyone who knows me knows I talk to everyone. And we have to collaborate for the good of our kids. I love what Chair Zenzinger said about all types of learners, because there are so many types of learners. And unfortunately, right now, so many of those learners are being left out. So I just have a passion about education, and the parents who are reaching out to me, which there's a lot of parents reaching out to me saying, please, please let us all be a part of this conversation. Let's all work together for the good of all kids. So I will tell you in a little bit about some of the ways I want to reach some of these learners, because there are so many different types.
Thank you. Representative Larson, thank you for joining us. And what are you seeing as the biggest challenge for our students, and how can the legislature help?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me back. This is my second year participating in the Chalkbeat panel. Was one of my favorite events last year, and this will continue to be so. I do prefer the in-person version, and fingers crossed we can do that 2022. I I did also want to just say, Representative Buckner, because I can still call you that for the next 48 hours. I'm going to sorely miss you on the Education Committee. We didn't get enough time. I only got 2 years, and you can hardly count 2020. But the House is really losing a true asset in the committee. I'm just glad that you're moving on to it in the Senate. So good to see you, and hopefully I'll see you a little bit more than I see most senators. And Rep. Caraveo, I'm excited to have you on the Education Committee. Really enjoyed working with you on public health issues, and hopefully we'll continue to do that on education. This is, these are truly unprecedented times. And I think we have a lot of opportunity. We also have a lot of challenges ahead of us. We don't have a lot of data that has confirmed what I think we've all anecdotally seen, and I suspect we all know, is that there's been tremendous losses sort of across the board in educational attainment for children. And it's affecting, different communities differently. Some more resourced communities have been able to shift kids more into private schools, shift them into online or learning pod models. Communities or students that were dealing with special education issues, be it dyslexia, early learning disability, or more severe learning disability, or those that were in speech or cognitive therapy, have seen, unfortunately, catastrophic slides in their progress and loss. So we really, 2021, as the vaccine hopefully becomes more prevalent, and society gets back to more of a level of normalcy, we're really going to need to be as nimble as possible to, first of all, identify where these slides were taking place, figure out what communities, what types of learners were most impacted by the COVID slide, what interventions can we get in place as quickly as possible to prevent further slide or get students back to where they used to be. And then hopefully there may be some opportunities for us to look and say, hey, some of the stuff we were doing beforehand, maybe we were just doing out of habit. I think there's a lot of, we're gonna have to take a big look at the end of this back at online education. I think there's definitely some negatives, obviously, from throwing everyone into it so quickly. However, I do think there are some positives. And I think it would be foolish of us as a state not to look back and say, hey, you know what? We were able to see decent outcomes in X, Y, and Z, with a fully remote learning model, or supplementing, traditional education with these online modules. So I think it's going to be a lot of opportunity. But I think the first priority is going to be making sure that we mitigate any losses or damages and come back as quickly as possible and get kids back on the right track. So.
Thank you. Representative Caraveo, you already laid out a lot of challenges that kids are facing. How does that shape your priority for this session? What sort of action do you think the legislature should be taking?
I agree with Representative Larson. I mean, my personal goal, first of all, is to learn as much about the ins and outs and minutiae of the education, what the Education Committee sees, given that this will be my first year there. But I think that the status quo was not working for a lot of people in a lot of ways, and not just in education, but in all areas of our society. And so this really gives us an opportunity to look at what we were doing before, and to really reassess what was working, what was not working. For some kids that I see, they love the online education that they are receiving now. In-person schooling had a lot of different pressures for them, and a lot of obstacles that they couldn't quite overcome. And so for some of them, it's working quite well, and for others, it's been a disaster. So I think this is definitely an opportunity to be nimble and to reevaluate how this system works for students and for teachers. For some, online education may be working quite well. For a lot of them, they're working double what they used to. And so we definitely need to look at how this is affecting educators, not just the kids that they are in charge of educating.
Thank you all, and we'll hope to dig into all of these issues as we go forward. Starting with learning loss, and we've had a lot of questions from our audience about this. Should we administer the CMAS tests this year. Is that something that we need to do to measure the extent of learning loss, or is this the wrong time to be doing a standardized test? And anyone can jump in who wants to answer that question.
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to jump in because I've been weighing that conversation in my mind for a while now. I've been tracking the conversation that's been happening with the governor's advisory board and where they left things. That was the unresolved question that sort of came out of that committee. And just as a point of view, my perspective traditionally is I'm not anti-testing, and I'm not one of the folks that believes that we should make dramatic changes to our accountability system. However, I have been convinced at this time that in the middle of a pandemic, we should not go forward with CMAS testing. I think that the logistics around carrying out that kind of testing regime is just not possible this year. I've been listening very closely, and I've actually been in the classroom and on the ground in my district, and I know just how difficult it will be able to do that and to do that safely. And there are a lot of unintended consequences around that as well. With that in mind, I will state that I intend to carry a bill that will direct CDE to ask for a waiver from the federal government. I believe that if we are granted that waiver, then we should proceed with putting a halt temporarily to this year's CMAS tests. If we are not granted that waiver, I feel then we need to move forward because the resources that we would put in jeopardy by moving forward without being granted that waiver, I think are too great. And so I would really hope that we would be permitted by the federal government to, for this year, put a pause on that. So that's my perspective, and I'm very pleased that I had an opportunity to say that.
Does anyone disagree with that?
Well, I'll jump in and mostly agree. I think that Chair Zenzinger is correct. I mean, there is a federal mandate under ESSA that requires it, is the first hurdle you've got to get over. So it's at this moment not even in our hands to decide. But should that be waived, should we be able to get a waiver, then the policy question arises. It's like, should we test or should we not? And my perspective is it should not be heavy-handed, but it would be a failure to not gather as much information as we can. As broken as the testing regime may be, as difficult as it may be to administer, as many waivers as may need to be applied for and given in order to deal with the nuances and the complexities of our very different circumstance. As challenged as that may be, at least understanding to some degree how terrible, horrific, minor has the COVID slide been. And we know it won't be a precise measure, but we know it will be an indicator. And I think it is incumbent upon us to have at least some understanding of where we're going. We anticipate the trend is negative. Maybe we will all be surprised and find out, yeah, the trend wasn't nearly as terrible as we thought it was. But we need to look and seek and find the information in order to have an answer to that. So I encourage it with the understanding it will be difficult, and there may be exceptions that must be granted just out of practicality.
So I'm wondering if I could just circle back in response to Senator Lundeen's response. I had more that I wanted to say, and I kind of lost track of it in my mind. But one of the most valuable aspects of collecting this data is that when you assemble the data, you're able to compare it. So you're able to see and project trends. For example, are we doing better? Are we doing worse? How's it going? And so part of what led to my perspective about putting a pause on this year's testing is that those variables will not be consistent. We will not be able to compare last year's data with this year's data because the circumstances in which that test is being administered and the variables that go into that equation is going to be so different. It's not going to be comparable. The NAEP, for example, made a decision not to administer their tests this year for that very reason, because they don't believe that what we are hoping to get out of that test will be actually valuable data, because the data itself is not comparable and it doesn't meet the basic requirements that you tend to look for when you're doing that kind of a data analysis. Yes, I am very curious. I want to know what happened to my kids. I've got 2 of them in public school, and they're getting very close to college, and I'm super nervous about, was there a slide? Where are they academically? Are they able to compete, get into college, be successful? I'm very curious of those things, but I don't believe the data that we would accrue from testing this year would be reliable data that we could then use to answer those questions. So I just wanted to jump in very quickly and respond to Senator Lundeen, because that was part of my thinking that went into my decision that I forgot to mention.
If I may jump in as
Please.
well. Yeah. And Senator Zenzinger's made a good point about the of how comparable this data is to previous years. But I do want to echo what Senator Lundeen has said. I do think it would be a tremendous mistake for us to not administer testing this year. And that's for a number of reasons. Now, I do think it's completely unreasonable to utilize this testing data for things that we have been doing year over year. For instance, making this testing data, using it for teacher or school performance evaluations, I don't think is fair or reasonable for the reasons that Senator Zenzinger outlined right here, is that this won't be an apples to apples comparison. But the thing that does have me concerned is that if we are not getting these data points, we already missed testing from last year in 2019. If we talk about foregoing that testing again this year, traditionally we look at about a 3-year window to get a good, good idea of where an individual student is progressing in their academics. And if we forego testing in 2020, we're talking about 3rd graders right now who, were in school last year, who won't have any kind of meaningful or measured test of their progress until they hit middle school. And by the time that data comes out, it will be they will be so far past gone for a correction or an ability to intervene. I think it would be a real disservice. I do think that we need to administer some kind of standardized test this year. I understand there are logistical issues. I do think that an online option could be made and would be easy to accommodate. Obviously, there would be sort of an asterisk on this data. We wouldn't want to put it in a apples to apples comparison because it's not apples to apples. But without the baseline of the data from this year, I don't think we're going to have an idea of where this slide is, what the impact specifically of the COVID, the COVID-related remote learning shift happens, as opposed to if we wait until the 2021 year to administer it when students are theoretically back in school for a year. I think it'd be a real mistake to forego that. And I think also it would disproportionately, frankly, impact students who are more at risk. You're talking about special education students, but also students who are traditionally underperforming already in those schools. So I do think we need to administer it, even with the technical challenges.
I wanted, in the interest of getting to more questions, I wanted to move on to the next question, which is about, but is also about learning loss. So if you have stray thoughts about CMAS that you want to work into your answer, please do. And I'm going to start with Representative Buckner since she didn't have a chance to talk about the testing. What types of resources can the state be making available, whether it's for summer school, whether it's for tutoring? What do we need to be doing to address what we know are significant gaps? And I want to bring in a point that one of the that Ryan made in the chat. We talk about meeting the needs of all students, but we know that certain groups of students have been much more disadvantaged by the way we have been learning this year. And so specifically, how can we be targeting that support to to the most disadvantaged students. And if you want to squeeze in a thought about testing, feel free. I'll start with you, Representative Buckner.
Thank you.
Or Senator-elect Buckner. It's going to take a while. It's been a few years.
Okay, I'm a state legislator right now, so that's all that matters. And yes, what I want to say about CMAS and the testing, I trust our teachers and our administrators. I trust them. From the parents that I've talked to, and I have 3 grandchildren, I have educators in my family, I don't know what we will learn from testing. We already know that everyone is behind. We know that. Some students perhaps are excelling, but that's not what I'm hearing. We have so many resources. I am working with some dynamic thought leaders in the community to come up with options. And I think that's what we have to do. We're not just going to reach out to our schools. We're going to reach out to thought leaders in our communities, at our colleges. There are more people out there now who are interested in education and what this pandemic has exposed. And there are so many cracks in all of our systems and areas of our lives. We have a lot of cracks in our education system. As far as resources, right now, I am stakeholdering on several bills with a myriad of education groups and thought leaders in the community. So I don't think we should leave anyone out of this equation.
Thank you. Representative Caraveo, do you have thoughts on what the legislature could be doing to address learning loss, and specifically for some of the most disadvantaged students?
Well, thank you. And I completely agree with Senator-elect Buckner in the need to trust teachers, to trust educators, to see what the next step is. This has been completely, earth-shattering in so many different ways in our society. And so we need to really rethink what our response is going to be by involving those people who know these kids best, and really to kind of go back to the testing question. I think that the one value perhaps would be in getting individual results for each student, but that can also be damaging once a kid is labeled as a bad student and what really is a year that they had no control over. I've seen psychologically how that can affect them and how that can affect their response to education down the line. So I think it's going to take a lot of individualized responses for each individual kid. Like I said, I've seen some kids who have done well with this, but for the most part, it's a year lost, and we're really going to need to take the input of educators and families and what the next steps are going to need to be.
Senator Lundeen, do you have thoughts on how we can be addressing learning loss?
Sure. I would jump in, and I would accept and extend Senator-elect Buckner's comments, accept and extend Representative Caraveo's comments, and say, trust the teachers. And I think we also need to trust the parents. One of the things that we have seen clearly in this circumstance is parents, as they always do, rally to the side of their child. They have done creative and interesting and unusual things to benefit their child, to prevent the slide to the extent they can, to maintain not only the academic health, but the mental health of their child. And the parents who are adept at advocating, who are natural advocators, who come from affluence, they have all the resources they need to do this. It's the parents and the communities and the students who perhaps at most risk, who don't have the same level of resources, that we need to put those resources on target. We need to move those resources directly to the creative impulses of those parents. Now, it's not going to surprise anybody that I will be bringing a piece of legislation in this next session to engage this conversation. And I, after 4 years on the state board, 4 years in the House on the education committees, now 3 years in the Senate on the Education Committee, I will beg my colleagues, let's dig into this, perhaps with a different and more inclusive spirit this particular session than we've been able to do or willing to do in the past. Let's trust the parents, trust the teachers, yes, but let's trust the parents too. Let's see if there is some creative way that we can provide some resources that go directly to the parents who have a slide, their child has a slide because they were unable to have the resource to do what they need. Let's try and recoup some of that ground, and let's let it be as customized as the parents know it needs to be on behalf of their life circumstance and their child's life and academic circumstance. And Senator Buckner, you and I are going to be working on this one together. I can tell.
Yes, we are. I just wanted to say, and I don't mean to interrupt, but when you said that, Senator Lundeen, because we've run many bills together in the House, you and I are usually on the same page. And I talked about trusting the teachers. And then when you said parents, yes.
Thank you.
Parental involvement is crucial. And during this time, I have seen so many parents rise to the occasion when they didn't think they could, but they said, Rep. Buckner, we still need to know how to do this. You know, so many students who live in poverty and who are disproportionately affected, some of their parents don't feel like they have license to be as involved as they should be. I am going to continue involving parents. Parental engagement is crucial, and there's a lot we can do to help all of these parents feel more secure in being more involved in their kids' educations. So, yep.
I will take your guidance, Senator. I will take your guidance. Let's work on this together.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I want to move on to school funding, which I know is an issue of great concern to our audience. When back in December, Senator Zenzinger, you said that you would like to see schools held harmless and not lose funding for the drop in enrollment that we saw this year, which was quite dramatic. And then in our conversations before the panel, Representative Larson said that he would have some concerns about that. And so I actually wanted to start with Rep. Larson about how he thinks that the school funding question should be approached in light of declining enrollment, and then kick it back to you, Senator Zenzinger, to respond.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to. Thanks for the opportunity. So yeah, there was an idea floated. I suspect we will see legislation around it to essentially more or less hold counts stagnant at pre-COVID levels for districts. And then I've heard different iterations. And again, there's no piece of legislation I've seen on paper, so I don't know the specifics here, but there's been talk about allowing districts that do see increasing enrollment to use the new higher count, but if a district loses students, to hold them harmless at that regular level or the level that existed pre-COVID. My concern, obviously, and it comes as no surprise, those of you that have been in the education realm, the PPR is already, many view as inadequate per student, and it's already got a lot of issues. The concern that I have is that there are so many new challenges that are being proposed because of COVID, and I apologize, I'm getting a little echo here. But there are so many challenges to doing the shift to online learning. Those districts, and I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I believe there's 40 districts that have seen an increase in enrollment during COVID. And it has tended to be those that were a little more nimble with online, some non-traditional, non-neighborhood schools that have seen that. They're taking on a disproportionate burden because parents have indicated that they have a preference for that kind of learning in this environment. And to dilute the increased resources that they would see otherwise by holding harmless traditional districts that have seen declining enrollment, and frankly, that had declining enrollment trends that predated COVID-19, I think would really be a huge issue of equity, frankly. It's going to take away, resources from the parents that are probably most impacted, that have had to take the drastic move of moving their student into a different district, while at the same time essentially holding districts, like Jefferson County and some others that had declining enrollment trends prior to COVID-19, and essentially holding them harmless. So, in a state that already has declining resources, where there already is scarcity, further diluting the PPR and literally, frankly, double counting students by paying, essentially one district to continue to educate a student that no longer attends there, and then taking the district that student moved to and removing and diluting the amount of money they get. I think is really wrong-sided, and I think it will exacerbate equity issues. And I just don't think that's the right move.
Senator Zenzinger.
Oh, thank you. So first and foremost, I have two children that are in the public school system. And over the summer, when we were looking at their educational opportunities this fall, we were trying to decide, what's the best placement for my kids, given their learning experiences, their preferences, what would they like to do? Were they nervous about the pandemic, or did risking the pandemic so they could see their friends, whatever. When we had to make these kinds of decisions, it was pretty early on in the summer, before we really had an opportunity to understand the lessons learned of how do we manage public schooling during a pandemic. We were reflecting on sort of the emergency procedures that went into place last spring, and the experience that my children have felt this fall have been very different than the experiences that they partook of last spring, when it was sudden, nobody had time to plan. It was just a very abrupt change in moving from in-person to all remote. So when we made that decision, I said, yes, I would prefer that my kids do in-person learning. Then about a month later, my district came back and said, sorry, but we're changing the choices. It doesn't look like we're going to be able to do any kind of in-person learning. You can either choose all remote, or you can choose hybrid. So we went ahead and chose hybrid because it was the closest to in-person learning. My point is that when most people had to make those decisions, it was over the summer when they weren't really sure what was going to happen. Since that time, we now have the enrollment data. We're able to pick it apart and kind of look at what are those differences. I would agree with Representative Colin Larson that if there was a district that perchance grew in enrollment, we definitely want to make sure that we reflect that in our school funding situation, and we want to make sure that they are not harmed in any way, shape, or forward moving forward. However, I suspect that, and in looking at the data, that a good number of those students that just weren't there in October will be in our public school system come January. And I believe this for a couple of different things. The majority of the students that were missing originally were full-day kindergarten students. And if I had a student that was, going to be attending full-day kindergarten online all day, I probably wouldn't have made that choice either. So if you set aside the kindergarten question, and if you look at the rest of the enrollment figures, I actually don't believe they're going to be that dramatic come January. We had a lot of student athletes that participate in athletics that typically happen during the fall that was actually moved to the spring. So I believe that you're going to get a lot more interest in coming back and participating in the hybrid system. Also, we have had a lot of work as a state. The governor put together his task force, and we've had a big push on seeing what we can do to get kids back into in-person learning as much as possible. And I truly believe that that is what people want, and I believe that that is what districts are trying to do. And so in order to accomplish that, I think that right now we need to take care of the house that's burning down, the pandemic, put out this fire, and then we can start thinking about, next year's questions of school funding and how we can get back on track with our regular course of business. I will also point out, as a small caveat, that when we put together the School Finance Act, I was a member of the Joint Budget Committee. I know firsthand that we were doing that budget based on predictions about how we thought the economy would recover, how are we doing financially, and we built that budget based on some pretty dire predictions. And so we ended up cutting school funding significantly, and that is where districts had to start from. to begin with. And so since that time, we have learned that our predictions were not as bad and that things are looking much better going forward. And so the question of whether we would take resources from other districts in order to hold other districts harmless is actually immaterial.
I see Senator Lundeen with his hands up, and I'm going to ask, because we're already at 12:50, make it quick, and and then afterwards we're going to go to Jason for another question that touches on funding, but for higher ed. So go ahead, Senator Lundeen.
Eric, I hate to correct you, we're actually at 12:52.
Yeah.
This is one of the areas where, in my original framing, the question I asked, will we be willing to learn? And as educators, it's incumbent upon us to always learn. You know, that is who we are in our nature. And can we, and I think that the lesson here is obvious. Are we willing to put the money where it needs to be? And that's with the student. Now, if the students are flooding into a district, that district needs to be properly supported. If they're flooding into another provider, that provider needs to be supported, because at the end of the day, it's ultimately about the student. That's our goal constantly. So can we figure out a way to make our finance efforts as nimble as the needs of the students and what they're seeking in terms of their academic and health response? So there's a learning opportunity here. Can we learn that lesson? Can we make our funding formula as nimble as the needs of our students?
Thank you. We're going to pass it to Jason Gonzalez now with sticking on the funding issue.
Thank you. Yes, again, this is about funding. Of course, top of everyone's mind in the higher education world is the budget, and what happened this year with the higher education budget. You, of course, made some tough decisions to cut it by 58%, backfilled some of that with federal money. But in terms of funding, I know that Governor Polis wants to put the money back into higher ed. How feasible do you see that? And do you think you're going to be able to? And yeah, we'll start with whoever wants to jump in on that.
I'm happy to answer, but I want to give my other panelists an opportunity first, since I went so long on the last question.
I'll jump in really quickly, but honestly, I don't think that's an answer that any of us know at this point. And the reason why I say that is because I think a lot of that will depend on what sort of transfer we get federally. I think with the new administration and the new, the changes that took place both in the federal, obviously the presidency, and then the federal Senate, I think the likelihood of a direct aid to state and local government federal bill is pretty high. So I think a lot of the answer, I mean, when we saw this last year, that frankly, a lot of the cuts that we had were designed, frankly, to complement where we were able to take federal CARES Act money and backfill some of these cuts. I suspect that a similar strategy will be deployed at the state level this year. I'm happy. I've seen the last couple revenue projections at the state. I know have not been as dire as I thought. I do know that the unemployment numbers for the last month were catastrophically horrible. And the revenue forecasts will lag that by a few months. So we may be right back into a terrible revenue situation. We won't know that until the spring. But I think those moving parts, frankly, are what is going to dictate that answer. If there's a significant federal transfer of funds to the state for state and local government backfill, and the revenues are not as dire as I suspect, frankly, they will be based on the unemployment filings, then I think that bringing higher ed back on par with what it was before the pandemic is very likely. If neither of those two things materialize, or if the federal package is smaller than anticipated, I don't know that we're going to be able to have the money to backfill it. So unfortunately, it's kind of a hurry up and wait. In my mind, someone else may have a different viewpoint, but that's what I see.
So I would agree with Representative Colin almost entirely. So there's a first for everything. Yes, when we made the cuts to higher education, it was in keeping in mind the federal offset that we were going to be receiving. And so even though they appeared to be quite dramatic through the state budget perspective, we did know that there were some direct payments to universities that more or less represented the amount of money that we cut from our state budget from the general fund. But that was a one-time, one-year decision. And so we will be faced with the exact same decision this year, and it is wholly unacceptable to cut higher education by 49%, which is what we ended up cutting it last year. So I think the struggle really will be to see how much of those cuts we can restore, and it will be contingent on what we think that we might be receiving from the federal government, and it'll be a balancing equation. We were down $3 billion in our budget last year, but then come September, we found out, oh, well, we're up $1 billion. So even though we're still down $2 billion, we're actually up $1 billion. So that was better than where we thought we were going to be. We also saw some improvement in the December forecast as well. So one of the lessons learned from being on the Joint Budget Committee last year is I now talk in the billions of dollars instead of the millions, which is kind of unfathomable. So even though we're still down $1 billion, that's a lot of money to have to make up. So we'll just have to kind of see how the economy recovers and how much federal aid we're going to receive.
I want to take this question one step further. And what's the concern heading into the future if you are not able to restore that funding?
Well, I'll jump in, and the concern is obviously big. I mean, none of us would say, oh, pshaw, no big deal. It's clearly that is very meaningful. And to make it even more challenging, we've been reliant in these types of budgets on federal dollars flowing in. You know, the Fed can make money out of thin air, and they do, and they send it to us. And so we use that. The economic reality is the more recent unemployment projections, which give us a current and leading indicator of future economic activity, are not positive. And so a principle that I would offer up is a principle of smoothing. I mean, let's not get too far over our skis in euphoria in this next budget cycle, because we have potentially increasing challenging days ahead of us. And so let's be cautious as we move forward. So that would be point one. Point two becomes in times of challenge, instead of, meat axe cutting, it becomes incumbent upon all of us to every level of the finance process to be as precise in optimizing the money we have. What is the best place to cut? What is the thing that we can do to preserve the best service for the client that we're seeking to serve? In this case, education. What is it that we need to be doing that puts the most money where it needs to be, which is closest to the student? That becomes the set of questions. So a couple of principles there. One, let's be cautious because there are challenging days yet ahead. And two, what can we be doing to optimize? And quite frankly, the principal question you asked is what happens if? I'm saying the best way to prepare for that horrible idea, what happens if, is let's think about optimizing today so that it doesn't hurt even more tomorrow.
Well, and coupled with your question, Jason, it's not only just what would the impact of these funding decisions be on the institutions of higher learning. We also are wondering what is going to happen as a result of the pandemic and the number of students that are choosing to attend college or not. We are really worried about the drop in higher education enrollment as one of those impacts of COVID, of the pandemic. That's one of the conversations that I've heard at the higher education level really is, even if we're able to take care of the funding question over here, will the students be there to participate in the higher education setting? given some of the current challenges. Think about the massive unemployment that has happened in this country, and how many families had to tap into what was perhaps a college savings account in order just to meet the bills, this month. And how many students are thinking, maybe I can't afford college right now. I need to put off or defer that educational choice because of our current circumstances. So there are a lot of other questions that are sort of coupled with that funding question that resides around the students and the impact of COVID.
So let's talk about the students. Of course, the pandemic is having a huge impact on student decisions. But the reality, even before the pandemic, is that while Colorado has had one of the most educated populations in the country, the state measures the lowest in many key outcomes in terms of college access and completion. So what legislation are you considering or like to see that might help with low-income and minority student enrollment and just generally helping students complete college? And we'll start with Senator-elect Buckner.
Thank you. And I just want to say this real quick. Senator Zenzinger's experience on JBC is going to be invaluable for all of us on the Education Committee. So thank you, Senator Zenzinger. I have a huge concern, and it's a concern that's been around for years. And this past year, the pandemic, and obviously the social injustices we've seen and all the cracks we've seen, especially inequalities in our education system, they're really standing out more than ever. And we know that discrimination plays an enormous role in perpetuating what we call the school to prison pipeline. Research has demonstrated that Black and Hispanic students are often punished more harshly for the same infractions as their white counterparts. So in order to understand the school to prison pipeline, we need to take steps to address and prevent this from happening. In Colorado, during the 2018 and 2019 academic year, Black students were 3 times more likely to be suspended than white students. Hispanic students were 1.7 times more likely to be suspended than white students. And as you all know, these inequalities have long-standing effects on all of our kids. In order for our kids to learn, they have to be in the classroom. So I am running some legislation that will have us look at how we are expelling our kids and suspending our kids, why, and we need more accurate data and put that into statute so we can address this really important dilemma, because it is a dilemma. It's not right that, and I've seen it when I was a teacher, and that's been quite a while ago, when students acted out in the classroom, no one knew where to send them. And I'm a speech pathologist with an endorsement in special education, and you would not believe how many of those students came to me because no one knew where to send them. No one knew how to help them behave. So some of the legislation I'm running will address this area. We need uniformed improvement plan for discipline reporting, and we need this to be consistent in all of the school districts. So we're going to look at suspensions and some of the best practices to prevent this from happening, and look at truancy and encourage evidence-based interventions to increase attendance instead. I think this is so important. And so when someone just asked me a question in the box about all students, well, all students, that includes kids who are dyslexic, who may be acting out because they're so frustrated, they don't know what to do in the classroom, so they act out because they don't want to stay in the classroom. This includes kids who aren't coming to school or who are coming to school and they need mental health support when they get to school. How do we know that they weren't disciplined badly before they came to school? Then they get to school and they act out. It's such a huge problem, and we intend to do something about it, because as a community, this bill was brought to me and this idea was brought to me through the community. through the community. So I know if all of us work together, we can improve this area.
Representative Caraveo, I know you're new to the Ed Committee, but what would you like to see around college access? And tell me about some of the community perspective there.
Thank you, Jason. Like everything, I look at this through a healthcare bent, and I'm very concerned about the decrease in enrollment, in particular around community colleges and some of the apprenticeship programs and kind of shorter healthcare workforce or work professions, that's what I'm trying to say, that they focus on. We have seen a huge increase in the number of people actually applying to nursing school, PA school, and medical school. And so those are all great trends, although it takes about 11 years to make a doctor. And so that's not something that we're going to see, even if we're able to invest in that kind of professional development for a very long time. But we need to be making sure that we have enough respiratory therapists, nursing assistants, CNAs, et cetera, to deal with these issues when pandemics are unfortunately going to be much more common down the line. And so I think we need to be making sure, in particular around minority students who tend to very heavily go into these areas or these professions, that we're incentivizing their ability to go into healthcare fields, and that we're taking advantage of some of the apprenticeship investments that we've made in the last couple of years that I've been in the legislature that have focused on these fields, thankfully. So I think that, I've seen kind of a difference in terms of increased enrollment in a lot of areas around healthcare, and as we see that shift perhaps from other areas or other professions in the past, making sure that there is adequate investment, especially for Brown and Black students.
I'll jump into the broader question, and I think this begins to address both some of the issues that Senator-elect Buckner raised, and we've just heard from Dr. Caraveo as well. Start strong, finish strong. And this concept of expanding apprenticeships, concurrent enrollment, elements of getting access to, especially for individuals who may be the first child in their family's history to be making this kind of an academic move. If they can do it in the safety and comfort of a school they're already engaged in, where they're already comfortable in high school, and they can start taking college credit, they can begin to believe they can do it. And also students who may be, pretty quick, they're smart, but it's common sense smart. It maybe isn't academic smart, and they're starting to lose interest in the academics. If we can find some sort of access to an apprenticeship, to something that engages not only their mind, but their hands in a way that keeps their mind active and engaged, there's a benefit there. And so to the question you originally asked about how do we get more attainment, how do we get more completion, I think start strong, finish strong becomes a construct we, especially in the K-12 environment, where it's clearly public dollars, we ought to be doing what we can possibly do to address some of these societal challenges right there while we've got the opportunity. Let's continue to expand programs for 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th graders to get them as far down the pathway, as quickly down the pathway as we can, so that they have a greater opportunity to actually finish strong. And with that, I'm going to say it is always a pleasure chatting with you folks, Erica, Jason, and all my dear colleagues. I'll see you on Wednesday if I don't see you before. And I appreciate this opportunity, and I've got to go. I apologize.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. We're going to move to audience questions, and we'll try and do maybe 2 people per response, and kind of think of this as a lightning round. And if any of the panelists see a question in the box that you feel you would like to respond to, feel free to type an answer as well, because we're not going to get close to answering all of these questions.
I kind of feel bad, Erica, because I've been answering them and I didn't realize we were supposed to wait.
Oh, no. Answering all along is also fine. Because some of them were very much in the mix of the conversation. I do want to make sure on the note on starting strong, I do want to make sure we talk about early childhood, and I do want to circle back dyslexia and literacy instruction, because that's been a big issue for several years. But on early childhood, we've seen the early childhood sector has been really challenged. There was some help for them in the special session, but we also have seen major declines in enrollment in public preschool. What do you anticipate in terms of early childhood legislation this session, particularly around affordability, accessibility? You're muted.
Yes, I was. I was about to type into the box that we did take a special look at this during the special session, and that we devoted a significant amount of money to looking at how we can better support our child care centers and our early learning centers. And I believe that we are receiving some good support from the federal government in regard to that as well. But I think it's a stopgap measure. So I suspect that once we kind of get through this year and this legislative session, we're going to have to return back to the conversation about what do we do that's more long-term. That tends to be the goal, which is, how can we get to some of these universal preschool, for example. I suspect that financially we're in a very difficult position to be able to quite get there quickly. But I'm glad that we were able to take up this question temporarily and recognize just the importance that early learning plays in a child's educational development.
Any other thoughts on how early childhood, what we might see this session? Representative Larson?
Yeah, so it was interesting. We passed a bill back in December that again was largely oriented toward the immediate and acute increased demand for essentially just child care. And I think that's probably, to be realistic, where the conversation around early childhood is going to be for the next year. As families are kind of grappling with how do I, make ends meet and still make sure that my child's looked after. And this is one where I get a little concerned because there are a lot of people that approach early childhood in very different ways. There's absolutely data that shows that, a robust early childhood, curriculum investment there does have gains later on down the road. However, there are many families that, simply don't view that as what they should be doing. They don't think that their kid should be in school until their kid goes to kindergarten. They think that it's a time for them to be with their families, for the families to be engaged. And I think some of the conversations that I've seen where they're rolling toward sort of this universalization of pre-K and wrapping it into a larger school system, I think is frankly contrary to a lot of the cultural values that frankly a lot of our different communities have. I know that particularly in the Vietnamese community, which I happen to be a little more attuned to than others, but I believe also in the Hispanic community, having children in the home or having them taken care of by a family member is something that's valued. And I think it would be a mistake for the state to push toward a uniformization, and frankly to forego viewing those arrangements as childcare. It was something actually that I had to fight for quite a bit on the floor during the little mini session we had to ensure that those non-traditional, more home-based providers could be included in this federal aid. And frankly, there are many communities where you talk about early childhood and you're talking about, aunt or uncle down the street who's watching 3 or 4 kids in the neighborhood. And, the way the bill was originally crafted was going toward, those more traditional, established, forward-facing professional things, which I just think isn't a reflection of the reality of how a lot of our communities view childcare. So, I think down the road, we're going to have a serious conversation as a state about what do we view, what are we trying to get from early childhood childcare, and what do we want to support? But I think it'd be a mistake to view it as an extension of the K-12 system.
I also wanted to pick up on the social emotional issue, the issue of children's social emotional health that we started our conversation with. Last year, there were some bills around student mental health that got tabled due to cost issues and COVID. Now we have both the isolation and also children who maybe have gone through real trauma because a family member was seriously sick or even died. And do we think that there's going to be money for social emotional programming? How does that fit in terms of priorities with academics? I can start quickly with you, Rep. Larson, and then I'd like to move back to.
Absolutely.
I'm looking at the clock, and I know I'm in the list of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. It should be a priority. Again, I think, as I alluded to earlier in one of my earlier responses, the budget situation really, frankly, is up in the air. But I think it would be foolhardy for us as a state not to prioritize mental health. This has impacted mental health in so many different aspects, the trauma of COVID, the fear, that sort of stuff. I think it would be foolish not to invest in it. And I suspect there probably will be resources and a focus on it. I don't think anything's terribly concrete at this point, but definitely something we need to look at.
If I could dovetail off of this and address one of your questions in here that I don't think we've touched on yet. And that really is, we're all about the kids and the social emotional trauma that has happened, but what about our workforce? And I will tell you that I truly believe that we are approaching a crisis with regard to our educator workforce here in Colorado. We were already in a massive educator shortage here. And in my interactions with educators, they are literally on their last leg. This has been the most difficult teaching year of their entire careers, and trying to juggle everything that came with this pandemic, the uncertainties, the lack of funding, the emotional scarring from the pandemic itself, worrying about your family, worrying about yourself and your own health. I know teachers, I used to substitute pretty regularly for a teacher who has MS. And this has been the scariest teaching year for her of her entire career, that she's decided that she can no longer be a teacher. And it gives her life to be a teacher. So I definitely believe that we need to address the social emotional health of our students, but we would be remiss if we didn't think about how we also move forward with regard to our faculty and staff. Because this has been traumatizing, and I really fear for the future of the educational profession if we don't take some time to invest in how we're going to boost the professional lives of our educators in this coming year. I think it also needs to be on par with the social emotional help that we want to deliver to students.
Representative Senator-elect Buckner, I feel you say you talk, I know you're a former educator, you talk a lot to teachers. I'm sure that resonates with you. What can the legislature do to be supporting teachers more?
Yes. I stay in close contact with a lot of teachers, and I don't think that until this year, during the pandemic, social injustice, and COVID, all of a sudden the teachers feel like they are being respected more. And it's really sad that we didn't give them this love and support and the accolades before it came to a pandemic, COVID, and social injustice. So we have to keep listening to those teachers, making sure that we address all of their needs. And by doing so, they relate to us. They tell us what they need. They tell us as legislators what they need to be a better teacher in the classroom and how to help their kids as much as they can in the classroom. But teachers deserve our respect, and we have to continue giving that respect and relying upon them for their expertise. I get some of my best ideas for legislation and stakeholding and bills through teachers. So we want them to continue to be a part of that equation.
I wanted to pick up on sort of, I think this is related. We've had a big focus on improving literacy instruction in recent years, and part of that was a bill, I think in 2019, to require all early elementary teachers to take new training in reading instruction. We've had a lot of teachers saying, this is the thing that's going to break me. We need more time. And the state board gave them 6 months, but they're saying we just cannot do that this year. At the same time, when we see what's happening with education, there's so much urgency around improving literacy instruction. Do we stick with these requirements that we put in before? And what can we do new going forward to improve reading instruction? And I'll start with, I know you have some thoughts on this, Senator Buckner, and then we'll kick it down the line.
Our teachers are strapped. We're asking them to do an awful lot right now. But one of my projects is going to be amending the Read Act, so it includes more kids. And so the implementation includes, for example, kids who are dyslexic. Right now, unfortunately, the kids who are labeled as dyslexia, as my daughter was, we don't really have a uniform way to screen them. And then we also need a way to help those teachers who are not as comfortable with instructing those kids who are dyslexic. We need to make sure we are doing more in-servicing with them. So one of the bills I'm proposing would be some of the amendments to the Read Act. Also, we need a timeline for implementation, but our teachers are pretty strapped. So we have to really take a clear look with those educators to see how we can meet the needs of the students, but not overload our children. We're already strapped, so we don't want to put more pressure on our teachers, but we can't leave these kids behind. For example, the SPED kids and the kids who are dyslexic. So that's going to be legislation that I know is coming. And I think it's really, really crucial that we not let it go.
Thank you, Representative Larson.
Yep, no, absolutely. And I think there's a real opportunity here to perhaps take a relook at how we do teacher licensing. Because look, for elementary school teachers, those that are involved in reading and literacy, I think the updates that we did to the Read Act in 2019, and then perhaps additional legislation building on getting more resources are critical. And I think it would be a big mistake to backtrack on that. However, I also think that we need to recognize that, frankly, somebody who teaches advanced level calculus to IB or AP high school teachers might not need training in, during a licensure period in reading, in reading pedagogy or things like that. So I'd like to see, frankly, a conversation. I've had very preliminary ones with CD, but in micro-credentialing, in really allowing teachers to more specialize their licensure experience to something that's relevant to the field in which that they intend on, teaching or practicing. I think there were a lot of really well-meaning bills that we passed last year that were sort of blunt instruments, said, oh, every teacher should have training in this. But, frankly, there are so many things that you could make the argument for, oh, it would be great if every teacher had basics in social emotional health and all of these sorts of things. But at a certain point, we're asking educators oftentimes to dip into their own pocket to take continuing education courses on the salaries that I think we can all pretty much universally say are not terribly generous. To invest in things that a lot of these teachers don't view as particularly relevant to their coursework, or what they do professionally. So I'd like to take a revisit at licensure, make it a valuable experience for the educator, and frankly, something that's going to benefit kids, and allow for, hey, if I'm an elementary school teacher, then yeah, you know what, it's probably a good idea for me to get training in early reading interventions, and to know how to screen dyslexia. If I'm a high school math or social studies or biology teacher, maybe I have other things that my license should direct me toward, or I should be allowed to spend my time and money and investment in that would be more valuable for not only myself, but for my students. So I think that's something we need to have that conversation around. But the larger question, I don't think we should backtrack on any of the requirements in the Read Act for elementary school teachers. Might be worth visiting as whether or not we want to have high school teachers having to do the same requirements?
So they don't, just so you know, but I would suggest that if there was ever a time to look at educator mandates and the mandates that we've placed on our schools, the height of a pandemic is probably the most appropriate time to think about maybe pausing some of the mandates that the legislature has really thrust upon the education community. And I would say that those mandates that we should think about pausing really need to come from the educators themselves. This is the moment for us to open up our ears, close our mouths, and listen to the experiences of the educators and the education community that is on the ground right now, educating our students in the midst of the pandemic, and ask them, how can we be helpful? And then go from there. Conversely, I also think it's very important that just because we may be pausing one aspect or another of these educational mandates doesn't necessarily mean that we need to just reverse course and throw the baby out with the bathwater. I am not proposing that we just roll back at everything and some of the progress that we've made, for example, in the READ Act. So I would say that, yes, we need to kind of look at how can we operate this year? What needs to happen this year? And then start having conversations about how we move from this year going forward.
I agree. And like I said earlier, listen to our teachers. I've been talking to teachers who they were already stressed out before the pandemic because they didn't make enough money to make it, the working second jobs, having to buy supplies for their classroom. They are under so much pressure. That hasn't gone away just because of COVID and the pandemic. So we just need to hone into those teachers and let them know how much support we have for them so we don't keep making the same mistakes.
So before we close, I'll try to get one more reader submitted question that we had before this. So someone asked, what legislation or what will be considered this session to address the high cost of higher ed?
I'll jump in real quick. One of the priorities that we made when I was on the Joint Budget Committee and looking at the budget is we really tried to maintain and prioritize student aid. So when we made cuts to the education budgets, that area we try to not touch because we really felt that it was important that we keep in place the student aid supports that we have. So however, we were under some enormous budget constraints. So we were not able to improve upon that. And what we were delivering as far as student aid goes is still not adequate to be able to afford higher education without taking on a lifetime of student debt. So I would say that I hope that we continue to maintain that student aid and that we actually improve upon it.
All right, I think that's all we have time for. I think Erica has something to say.
Oh, no, I saw you on mute. Senator Buckner, did you want to jump in on that?
No.
Oh, okay.
The only thing I want to add to what Senator Zenzinger said was I'm already starting to meet with our regents to see what ideas they may have, because they're going to definitely be a part of this conversation. So we have several new CU regents, for example, and I'm going to make sure that I meet with them and the other regents across the state, so I can see what their thoughts are and how we can assist them.
All right, so we'll close this out. Thank you to all the panelists for taking the time out of the day today to talk with us. And thank you to everyone that attended today. Also, thanks to our event partner, the Morgridge College of Education at the University of Denver. And special thanks to our partner, our event sponsor, apologies, the Colorado Education Association. We have a quick survey. It should take about 2 minutes. And if you could, please fill this out before you exit the event. And thank you all for attending.